So there we go. My name is Tamara Bauer, and I am very excited to engage with you today in some dialogue around dialogue. And I'm looking forward to hearing what's on your mind as far as what it's like to gather people together and try to make progress, especially when the stakes feel high and when the tensions feel significant when it comes to how people come together and how they gather. Before we jump into, I hope, a helpful process for you all, I would love to, and we've done this just a little bit, but I'd love to have you all do a quick introduction so that when we're in breakout rooms together and when we're talking about our own challenges, we feel comfortable and we feel like we know each other. So if we could just go through and share your name, where you're zooming in from today, and more so what brought you to this session. I think that will be a great context starter for us engaging. So my name is Tamara Bauer. I'm here in Manhappiness at K-State. And when I think about what brought me to this session is that the work has found me. Like when I think about the challenges that our community is facing today, bringing people together in ways where they can really come together and make progress is important. So I'm just going to send it off to Maddie and have you share next.
Yes. Hi. See some familiar faces. I'm Maddie Ogle. I work at the Manhattan Public Library here in Manhattan. And so I am zooming in from the library today. And I'm sitting in with this session, hoping to just gain some good conversation and discussion over creating safe spaces to talk about specific conversations regarding important topics like we have mask usage and Black Lives Matter, and a lot of important topics that people find passions in, and you obviously have conflicting views in that with a different variety of people. So just hoping to engage in what dialogues could look like amongst our staff with that.
Thanks, Maddie. Tracy, how about you?
Hi, I'm Tracy Gunner, graduated May 2013, College of Business, emphasis in marketing, minor in Spanish, minor in leadership studies, and international business certificate. And I was passionate about everything. So that's why I love anything leadership studies. I love to continue learning new things.
And Nicholas?
Hello, my name is Nick. I am currently a freshman enrolled in Lead 212. I am zooming in from the 7th floor study hall of We Fault Residence Hall here on campus. And I was looking at these sessions, and unfortunately a couple of them weren't able to fit into my schedule, but I'm super excited to be here, and this one did, so looking forward to it.
Ashley?
Hey y'all. I'm Ashley Anderson. I'm coming to you from College Station, Texas. I work for Texas A&M University as a career coordinator for first and second year business students. And obviously I just started my role in June. And so this is definitely learning a lot about A&M, a lot about the culture of the Career Center here, the culture of the students within the business school. And so just continuously trying to grow as a new professional and having just better conversations or doing my workshops better, just creating space a little bit better. So just wanted to continue engaging in that, and also just getting to connect back with leadership studies, of course. So good to be here.
Betsy?
Hi everyone, I'm Betsy Lease. I am coming from Orlando, Florida today. I decided to just reconnect as an alum. The College of Leadership Studies wasn't even there when I went, when I graduated, but I saw this as just an opportunity to hear some fresh ideas, some new ideas. I work as a senior administrator in the 8th largest school district in the nation, and I work in evaluation systems, which are difficult dialogues when you're working anytime with teachers and district and school leaders, and taking on those efforts. So I'm just excited to be here today to hear a little bit more about what everyone says.
Thank you. I'm loving the wide range of engagement that we have, but that we all have the common experience of gathering individuals and dialogue through that. Abigail Molzer. I know I can't call you Abigail. I got to call you Abby.
I know. I hear it and I'm like, wait, right, that's me. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Molzer. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a May 2020 graduate from Kansas State. Wild to think about. And I recently, I guess somewhat recently, in June, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah to start my graduate assistantship and master's program with educational leadership and policy, emphasizing in higher education student affairs. So I'm currently coming to you from Salt Lake City, working in my office, which is the Office of Orientation and Transition. And I oversee all of our first year mentoring programs. So I oversee 42 mentors who then engage in about 1,000 first year students. And so actually one of our monthly meetings is in a few days. And that's really a time that we engage students and our mentors to really talk about like how do we build really powerful relationships with our mentees and like dive below the surface, especially as we're onboarding all of these new students. So very excited to be here and to see a lot of familiar faces.
Thank you. Stephen.
Hello, Stephen Kuchar. I graduated in 2017 and 2018 with multiple degrees in accounting and music performance. I play piano and organ. I'm currently coming to you from Wichita, but I'm transitioning down to Fort Worth next year. And as I move from a position in oil and gas that was founded in Oklahoma to a private equity company that's headquartered out of San Francisco, interested in continuing to explore how to engage productively and respectfully with people that I might disagree with, while at the same time not just running towards echo chambers of people who think the exact same thing as I do, and figuring out how to have those conversations about inclusion or just process improvements and doing things better that are in a productive way and aren't just yelling, debating, preaching, or just going with the flow.
Thanks, Stephen. That's great context. Abby, the other Abby, Abby K.
Yes, hello. Sorry, I had to turn my video off. My boss was calling me about a project that I was looking forward to, so I needed to get some details from her. But hi, everyone. I'm Abby. I am a 2017 graduate from Key State, and after graduating, moved out to Fort Collins, Colorado, where I'm calling in from today. So I currently work with Habitat for Humanity there. I'm their volunteer manager. And what really drew me into this session was I have learned in my about 4.5-ish years there, and even more so now, that just people are a little messy and a little hard to manage sometimes. And I think having those skills to bring them in and find alignment and move forward without making anyone feel ostracized or shame or anything, especially as our organization looks at how we can use volunteers more efficiently. We're making a lot of changes, which are all good for our organization, but it's going to take a little bit of alignment to get there. So I think that this will be good for me to kind of learn about how to do that and how to navigate that.
That's great. Thanks, Abby. And I know we have a couple folks that are calling in or maybe don't have your videos, and I certainly don't want to call on you unless you're in a place where you can visit. But if you'd like to unmute and say a quick hello in your context, that would be great. All right, well, let's jump right in. So I really appreciate hearing where everyone is coming from, because I think that as we consider ways of gathering, especially around issues that, you know, there are multiple opinions and experiences and perspectives around, we have to think about who is in the room and who our people are. And so the structure of our time today is going to be, I'm going to give you a few things to think about and then put you into some small groups to hopefully have you process and apply how these questions might inform the challenge that you face or the experiences that you have in terms of gathering those around us. This is part of our 11th annual Spirit of Leadership. And so we've, as a Staley School of Leadership Studies, it's been really important that we think about how do we continue to build the network and the relationships among people that have been connected in some way to our mission and to our programs or to our academic coursework. And so we want you to know that every year when you get an invitation from us, it is for you. We want this event and this experience to be part of the way that you can stay connected as an alumni or as a stakeholder or as a current student like Nicholas. And that the hope is that some of the ideas and concepts that we've created give you another place to keep learning and to talk with people who care about making progress and exercising leadership. So I do want to point out that Spirit of Leadership is a way of gathering, right? It's a way of bringing folks together to do work around purpose and continued learning, but also in the spirit of a community that we hope that you feel connected to. So a big welcome. And if I can answer any questions at the end about our program, we'd be happy to stay on and do that. So gathering, convening, hosting meetings, bringing people together, dialogue, any of the words that you would like to use to describe how you bring people together. I believe is an act of leadership. We might see it as a technical piece. I know we've all, especially in the past year with Zoom meetings and calendar Outlook meetings, we know how to technically bring people together. But what moves things beyond just a transactional experience to something where people feel differently? They've changed as a result of the time together. And I think as people aspiring to exercise leadership, we can see the role of leadership connected to the art of gathering. So from your time in leadership studies, or if you're new and just kind of connecting with the Staley School, I want to talk about 3 of our guiding principles as to how we believe and how we practice leadership. First of all, that leadership is a relationship. So leadership is about the people around us. And I think it was, well, one of you or several of you talked about that people can be messy, right? Like we all have very different experiences and orientations to how we want to engage with each other, to our workplaces, and especially around the daunting community issues that we have. And so when we think about leadership as a relationship, how do we tend to those relationships? And certainly gathering and convening is a way to do that. The other way we talk about leadership is as an activity. So it's not the title that you hold, it's not the position that you have, but it's an activity, it's a verb, it's something that we do. And so if we see a challenge that we're facing, how can we deploy ourselves? How can we engage in the exercise and the activity of leadership in a way that helps address whatever challenge or problem that we're facing? And certainly bringing people together is a way to be able to do that. And then the last is that leadership is progress. So why lead? Why exercise leadership? It's not to maintain status quo, right? We might call that management or just, overseeing things. But when we think about what's at the crux of the why, I think about it as progress. And progress might be small steps or it might be big leaps, but how do we help create the kind of communities, the kind of workplaces, the kinds of gatherings where people want to be and where they can be their full selves and feel like we are all contributing? And certainly gathering and convening is a way to do that. How people identify with themselves in those spaces and in those relationships will help then them be able to bring their gifts and talents to whatever the goal is that you have together. And then the last piece is leadership is risky. I think those of you who have graduated, like I think in the program, we're like, oh, we all want to be leaders. We want to engage in leadership. And we get out in like the real world and we're like, holy cow, this is really hard, right? It's a little different than in a safer space. But we know that it's risky, but we need people to take those risks. And we need people to say things like, hey, let's gather and convene people to talk about what's going on with masks in our community, just like Maddie talked about at the public library. Let's talk about the issues that we're facing today in a way that we can actually make progress. But we know by doing that, that's risky. So I want to start today by telling you some of the ways that the Staley School has worked to gather and convene in some new ways that put these 3 things forward and feels very kind of risky to us. And then we're going to move into letting you all talk about how, in what ways is it risky for you to exercise leadership around convening, and then walk through a 3-step process to help us kind of unpack what's at the heart of a gathering so that we feel like we can do these ways of exercising leadership focused on relationship, activity, and progress. So the first thing that we have been doing for 4 years formally now is a large program called Wildcat Dialogues. And I know many of you have participated in this or probably even helped plan it at some point. I'm looking at several faces here, or served as a facilitator. Nicholas, you might have just engaged in this as a participant this week. But one of the things that happened probably about 8 years ago on campus is that there were some posters that were hung around campus that had language that was geared towards dehumanizing different races on campus. And so that was a really difficult time for our campus community to come together. And as we were talking with our students in a classroom, we were asking, what do we need to do? And bringing people together through dialogue was a way in which we could heal together, but also think about acting and moving forward together. So there was a program called Cats for Inclusion, where the goal was to think about how do we create a more inclusive campus community. And it was started by members of our Black Student Union and students taking Lead 405 Leadership and Practice. And in the 8 years since then, we have now created those experiences into a campus-wide program for all first-year students called Wildcat Dialogues. And we bring over 1,000 students together every fall semester just to have an introductory dialogue on what it means to be part of a campus community like K-State. And the goal of it is to use storytelling. So you'll see up here, my story, your story, our story. And we ask students to think about sharing their stories. We have current students who share their stories related to how they feel connected or belonging to our community. And then we ask our new students to think about, how do you experience belonging? And when in your life have you felt like you've been connected to a community, and when haven't you? And how do we understand the complexity of coming together in that way? The Our Story piece is really focused on how do we create a community of belonging for everyone at K-State, given the multiple identities and the tensions and the difference we all come to. Because if we're going to aspire to K-State family, how do we do that? And how do we do that intentionally? So that's one formal way we have tried to exercise leadership to gather individuals together. After Wildcat Dialogues, we began an informal way of gathering folks together. So, during summer 2020, there was a lot of tension around certainly COVID, the uncertainty with the economy, and also along understanding racial equity in the United States. And so we were feeling the weight of that, as I'm sure many of you were. And so we put together an informal space called A Space to Connect and invited interested stakeholders to come together through dialogue. And we didn't have a real clear idea on what that was, but we knew that people coming together would be the first step in trying to think about how to make sense of and how to process all of the events that were happening around us. Following that, we created more formal spaces to connect. We had so many people interested in wanting to gather that we offered it more outwardly and through our K-State Today networks to be able to say, let's come together after, if there's something happening in our communities and in our societies, let's gather together, let's connect and let's engage. And a little bit later, I'll share with you the guidelines and kind of the process we use to be able to gather, because we didn't know who was going to come. We didn't know what they wanted to talk about. We just knew that there was something happening that we wanted to bring people together around. And so I'll share with you an example of what that looks like. And then the third way I'll share this is that we've also been hosting these Let's Talk About It sessions. So knowing that people want additional spaces to learn, to grow, to dialogue, we created a Let's Talk About It. And we've had 2 sessions this past spring. One was in response to some of the Asian American hate crimes that were happening. And so we wanted to allow us a space where people could come process and talk about those. And then another one was talking about the importance of names. And so a former K-State football player and alumni, Jaime Mendez, talked about his journey in reclaiming his identity from being, so Betsy, I'm going to claim maybe you and I on this know this. We knew him as Jamie Mendez, right? But Jaime Mendez is his preferred name. And so he shared his story, and then we allowed the participants to be able to share their story. So here's 3 kind of larger ways that we've gathered, but we also know that we gather in our conference rooms to talk. We gather in our offices, we gather in the hallways. And so whatever your form of gathering is, we know that it can be risky and it can be challenging to be able to engage. So this is where I'd love to hear from you all in our chat, if you wouldn't mind sharing what kinds of issues or what kinds of purposes do you want to gather people around that you think would be challenging or difficult?
Can you also put the question in the chat?
Yes, thanks, Tracy. Yeah, I'm appreciating these initial pieces, right? We know that there are some really hard issues, I feel like, to dialogue around, everything from mental health to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Abby, I really appreciate what you said, that any place where vulnerability is needed, that's a different way of showing up, right? That's a different way of coming together in this space. Yeah, and thanks for Betsy, you talking about how do we come together as a workplace team? I find this even in within our own department in leadership studies. How do we come together and talk about the process challenges that we all have as a group in terms of how to, best utilize our strengths, best be able to contribute and work together in a team? Wonderful. Yeah. And certainly around change, right? And the changes that we are all going through, let alone the changes that we're experiencing moving forward. Well, keep these in mind, and we're going to move into breakout rooms in just a little bit, where you're going to have a chance to think about some big concepts related to how we gather and apply them to whatever context that you're in. So there's no wrong or right here. And I realize you might be thinking about, I just need to have a crucial conversation or a difficult dialogue with a coworker or with a family member, or I might be thinking about it in terms of how do we address this big kind of elephant in the room or challenge that we're facing. And I think that these principles and concepts that we're going to walk through can apply to any of those. So at the end of our session, I'm going to share all the resources that I've been utilizing to learn more about how to gather. And there are multiple. I have not found one resource that has helped me do any of this well, but this is a combination of all of these resources that really help me think about gathering in intentional ways and for the practice of leadership. So the first consideration I think is important is to identify your purpose. And I love the word gather because I think it's a mindset shift between just a meeting or a technical event that we're going to host, but it's a way of bringing people together. But our important question is, what is the purpose or what is the occasion? And, I'm going to use this in simple terms, but I have two kids with birthdays this week. I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old birthday to celebrate. And I might say the occasion is just a birthday party. But if I do that, I'm going to only be focused on making this birthday party like every other birthday party I see online or in the media, right? And I might miss the real reason that we're gathering and that we're having this special occasion. So last night for my 9-year-old, I was able to help him think about who are the people that he wants there? What are the foods that he wants to have? What would bring him the most amount of joy on this one day a year that we're going to celebrate him? And if I hadn't asked those specific questions, we might have missed that special piece to really help him feel like this is a day for him. Same with bigger questions, right? So when you think about why you would gather in your workplace or with students that you're working with or engaging. What is a big purpose that you can address? So I'm going to ask you to really think about that when we move into breakout rooms, is what is your purpose? The other question is really who is your event for? So similarly to the birthday example, if I was just planning a great birthday party, but I wasn't thinking about it for how it's going to be different from my 9-year-old son to my 5-year-old daughter, those are going to be really different experiences. So how do you think about yourself as a host and what the purpose of your gathering is? And then lastly, what are the specific needs in this moment? So we might think about, again, going back to the birthday example, all birthdays over all times, but what's a 9-year-old's birthday and what's a 5-year-old's birthday? And how does it meet their needs in this moment? And we know that you all work with stakeholders from a lot of different backgrounds and have a lot of different expectations for how you gather. But what are the specific needs for that one gathering? And if you can identify those, then we can work to build and create a process to bring people together to better address that. So I'm going to put these questions in the chat and then move you into some breakout rooms. And the goal is for you to just share specifically, what do you think the occasion or the purpose is? Who is the event really for? And what are those specific needs? And think about the goal that you have for gathering in this first time. The last thing before I put you in the breakout rooms that I want you to think about is that I think as gatherers, it's so much easier to focus on the logistics of the event, which are really important. Like today for us gathering, we needed to make sure we had Zoom. We needed to make sure we had like all the resources, the invitations, but we can get so focused on the logistics, we forget about the actual experience of what we're gathering for. So these 3 questions move beyond just the logistics, but are asking you to think about the needs of the people and what you want to do as you gather. So any questions before we break into some small groups to chat, or any thoughts on these kind of big pictures here? Okay, here are the questions, and then I'm going to move us into some breakout rooms. All right, and then we're going to come back in about 6 minutes. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the raise hand feature and I'll come join your small group, but otherwise I'll see you back in just a little bit. There is a countdown timer, so you don't need to return when you see that. It'll just bring you back naturally. That's just a cue that you can start wrapping up your conversation. Right, well, welcome back. And Abby, yes, I always think of you when I go to refill my water, so that really will be a lasting legacy, which is awesome. Any shout outs from your conversation that you want to share with the big group? Anything you might be that might be helpful to all of our learning as we think about gathering with purpose? Yeah, Betsy.
Yeah, so I worked with a wonderful group of ladies, and some things that I really loved was this idea of connecting in a shared experience and having a strong purpose around that. The ladies talked about building confidence within their team and a little bit of fun even. So it was great to hear all of their perspectives.
And I love that. We might just think like the event title is our purpose, but what you're talking about is the experience and what it is that you're hoping to really accomplish and make progress through as you engage. That's awesome. One more shout out. I'm gonna share something that Abby Molzer just shared, and the question of who is this for? I think another question is who isn't invited in this group, right? Or who are the voices that maybe we haven't considered as we think about bringing folks together, who might not feel comfortable or show up or engage. And so when you think about who it's for, think about also those unusual voices or the individuals that we know will have an important stake in the conversation, but might not come just from the initial purpose of gathering. I absolutely love that. So next we're going to move on to the role after you've identified the purpose, really thinking about what do you do when you come together. And to me, this is the most important part and also the most difficult part. But the way that it helps me in terms of a leadership lens is that how do I create the container or the space to truly accomplish what my purpose is? And there's a few elements that, there's a lot of elements. I'm just picking a few elements today to really think about how do we gather intentionally for the kind of dialogue that we hope to advance. And so the first is how do we clearly communicate why we're gathering? And, you know, for the event of Wildcat Dialogues, how I shared, it honestly took us 3 years of gathering before we got crystal clear on what our purpose was, because we had multiple purposes. It was a first year experience event. It was around difficult dialogue. It was storytelling. It was, you know, feeling a sense of community. And over our time, we got really clear that the purpose was about creating a community of belonging at K-State. And so how is it then, once you get crystal clear on what that purpose is, how do you clearly communicate that with the people that are attending and engaging so they come ready to contribute and to add value in that same direction? And again, the title of the event often isn't enough, right? So Maddie, I'm going to go back to something you talked about with, if you know, in the libraries, if you were going to have a dialogue or an open public forum at the library around mask mandates or around COVID-19 vaccinations, if you just name it at that, people are going to come in and like, I'm ready to share my opinion and to have my muscles out and ready to, debate in that. But what if you come together to say, we want to come as a space of learning, in a place of curiosity, in a place of progress. And, when you come to this, be willing to learn, be willing to engage. And so as the facilitator or the convener, how you bring people into that conversation will be really important. The other piece is, how do you establish norms or community agreements? So one thing that's really important, especially if you're going to talk about something that has high stakes or involves a lot of emotion, which I would even say, going back to Betsy's example, workplace dynamics, how you engage as a team can cause, that's a lot at stake if you're going to talk about how you show up on a day-to-day basis. And so as part of you creating the container, after you clearly focus on the purpose and you talk about why you're here, you're going to talk about how you're here, how we're going to gather together. So you might think about these as road rules or community norms. I like to think about them as commitments to one another or our community agreements, because again, it's inviting people in. It's not my rules that you have to abide by, but it's a shared place where we come together. And so as you're engaging in, or before you engage in the dialogue, allowing the group to identify what's going to be important for them for how they engage with each other, and letting them talk about that and add to an idea will help create this container where it feels safe, where they can be themselves, but also where they can risk and be a little bit brave in terms of surfacing some difficult issues. And I'm going to give you a few examples of these in a couple slides. The third way I think you create the container is what process you're going to use to engage in the experience. And there are so many ways to gather around dialogue, and I will share some resources at the end that have been really helpful for me. I've got some resources that are going to be high stakes dialogue, like a very structured process for how you talk about something that is really contentious and high stakes. And I also have some ideas on, if you're just gathering together around purpose to try to figure out an issue, how do you still create that container intentionally? Because we know that if we just show up and we're like, hey, Whitney, which by the way, hi, Whitney, so good to see you. If we're like, hey, Whitney, let's just get together and talk about, the COVID-19 vaccine, that's not going to create the same process and progress than if we actually create a container. So there's 4 things that you can really think about in terms of structuring a dialogue that I feel like are really valuable for how you gather. One is powerful questions. So really taking the time to establish, what is the most important question you want your participants to answer? And how do you frame it in a way that will invite them in, that will elevate that sense of responsibility and engagement, and allow them to really process what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and how they respond. So taking the time in advance to come up with those questions will be really important. The other option is an open dialogue process. So perhaps after you create these community agreements or group norms, say, here's our issue, here's our topic, let's engage in dialogue. And there's some framing about what dialogue is compared to debate that can be part of your group norms that will allow them to engage in a more structured or open process. So I would say that was how the Spaces to Connect area that I shared earlier went, was that we established what our purpose was, we walked through some agreements, and then we said, let's engage in dialogue, but let's do that through our community agreements to each other. The third is storytelling. So storytelling is its own, I feel like, discipline when it comes to something you could really research and learn how to do. But storytelling is a really powerful way to connect and empathize with one another. So if we're talking about something that we know is going to be particularly polarizing or cause a lot of angst and heat in the moment, allowing individuals to talk about a story of a time that they've experienced whatever it is that you're talking about is a really great way to invite people in to be vulnerable, to be empathetic, and to see people as humans, not just as opinions, which I think is the goal of dialogue, is to move away just from opinions, but to see people as humans in that relationship. And then the last is this model of crucial conversation. So again, if you know that you're going to be talking about something that is really high stakes and you know you're going to have, it's going to be hard to dialogue in a productive way, there are a few models that you can use that really walk through specific ways to be able to have share talking time and to engage in a more formalized setting. So I'm going to give you a few examples of these. So for instance, if you are wanting to engage in dialogue, you can talk a little bit about what dialogue is. So this is an example from our Wildcat Dialogues event where we bring our students together and we say, tonight we're going to dialogue. And we know that at the heart of dialogue, it's a collaboration where we're working together towards a common goal. And for this, our common goal is a community of belonging at K-State. 2, it's a process for considering multiple perspectives and finding agreements. And then 3, it's that we all have the answers. We're assuming that the people coming together have the most amount of responsibility and authority to be able to answer the questions that we're coming together with. And then we talk through different dialogue skills. And these skills, again, you can find lots of different dialogue skills, but when we were thinking about our purpose and what we're hoping to accomplish with our individuals, these skills were going to help us get there in the best way possible. So allowing your participants to really talk through and understand what it means to practice perspective taking or to say yes and what those look like. So this is an example, again, of kind of setting up after you understand your purpose, how you can create those community norms. And then the other thing we want to do is talk about the commitments to one another. So before you engage in the dialogue around the issue, establish what some of these community norms are going to look like and have individuals read these out loud, have them talk through them, ask questions. You can even ask, how do you see these in your life? How, like, what would be an example of assuming best intentions? And then always allow for the individuals to amend or to add to any of these commitments so that they feel like they can be fully present. So that's an example a little bit around how to create this container. And I think in the interest of time, we won't do breakout rooms here, but I'd be curious, out of these, kind of bullet points, what questions you might have, or how might you think about connecting your purpose to one of these action steps? Maybe we could just hear from 1 or 2 folks.
I really like what you said about having one specific end goal or question to focus on. Sometimes when we gather, we can go on tons of different places, tons of different paths. There's so many questions we are trying to answer as seen in all the different examples we talked about in the chat. So I think having one question, taking it one step at a time is definitely a good idea.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Nicholas. And that is really hard for me. I like to do lots of things all at once. And I found that in especially intentional ways of gathering, having a more concentrated focus and purpose, and then therefore questions is really important.
I think adding on to that, because everyone can come into a space with slightly different ideas of what the outcome is, not only having like the established outcome or like main topic of conversation is important, but also those community agreements, because we're all going to have different ways of communicating prior to coming into that space, but being able for that hour to agree on this is how we're going to think about things in terms of like being open to conversations and being challenged, like setting that baseline is really powerful. It gives people a little bit more space to really be vulnerable and dive a little deeper.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. And as you were saying that, actually, I was reminded at the early part of August, I was selected as a juror for a trial in Manhattan. And this is my second time being selected as a juror. And my first experience was not very positive. And where it wasn't positive, it was in the jury deliberation. And I felt like, one, I didn't exercise leadership at all. And two, I was just shocked at the way in which we engaged in dialogue. And so I was preparing myself to think about what role could I play that we could maybe do this better. It's a whole new group of people, whole new trial, whole new experience. And so we spent some time before we started talking about the issue itself, how we wanted to talk about each other. And I think it really set us up to be more to engage in differences of opinion in a much more productive way. So thanks for reminding me. That was, as you were speaking, I was like, yeah, it doesn't even have to be the times you gather people, but you can still kind of host and create a container with the people that you're around. So I think then the third kind of bullet point as you think about gathering is facilitating as a generous host. And there's a lot in this one saying I want to kind of unpack. And the first is when you gather folks together, I think it's really important to see yourself as a facilitator. And that's different from a participant, meaning that when you are gathering, you are hosting people for a purpose and for a progress. And so how can you step back and understand your role as someone who wants to facilitate the purpose and the progress and create the container? And to me, how I can do that best is to think about myself as a generous host. So we've all had people come to our homes or to our workplaces where we've been in a hosting role. And I know that one of the things we try to do is make everyone in that space feel comfortable in whatever room that is. So, you know, Nicholas, if you're in leadership studies building for the first time, like I know the building, you may not. So I'm going to help you understand where are the restrooms, where do you want to sit, where do you go get coffee? What are all the things that I can do to help kind of meet those needs? Well, beyond just the technical, how can I also then facilitate a process that invites in and holds all the perspectives in the room, that keeps the container towards the purpose that I want to go to? And that's this idea of being a facilitator and a generous host. The key difference, I think, between a participant and a facilitator is that you help hold the space, but you're inviting the group to create the experience. So you don't necessarily have control over what people say or how they say it or how they engage, but you're creating the container to allow them to create the experience with you. And that's a risky thing to do. You know, thinking back to Wildcat Dialogues, we had over 130 small groups gather last week. And as I was listening to all of the facilitators have these conversations with about 8 to 10 people in small groups, every single conversation was different. And as someone who's responsible for the event, that felt a little risky to me because I'm like, oh, if we all had the same exact experience, that would be wonderful. But when you allow the group to create the experience and you're creating the container, it's going to look really unique depending on who's in the room. And so how do you be, as a host, really generous in making sure that all voices have an opportunity to be shared, that the differences in opinion get elevated in a way that's productive and towards your goal? So there's a lot of different tips and tricks, I think, for facilitators that you all might be really familiar with or that might be new for you. But learning to facilitate a dialogue in that way is something that I think is a really important skill and something that we don't often experience until we're in that role. And so, thinking about the powerful questions you want to ask and allowing enough wait time to really facilitate a space where people can contribute, I think are really important. And if you are trying to jot these down, know that I will send out the PowerPoint slide after. I should have said that from the very beginning. But the facilitator, I think, is what continues to help the group make progress. And what's hard about that is that you've got to be in the moment. You've got to be really present and listening to who's sharing, what are they sharing, how are they engaging, when can you ask a follow-up question that maybe someone else is afraid to ask or doesn't know how to ask, so that you can continue to bring people together towards that purpose. And that's really where, again, point number one matters, right? Like, what's your goal and how do you just keep focusing in on the comments and the ways in which people can gather to make progress in that way. So here is another example of a way in which you can facilitate generously and a little bit more of like the high intensity model. So this comes from a book called Crucial Conversations. And what I liked about this as an example for our learning today was that if I was really anxious about how people were going to gather and it felt like an extremely high heat or contentious dialogue, I might want to use a more structured process than just an open dialogue. And what's great about this process here is that everyone has access to it. So again, part of my commitments to one another might be explaining the process and then asking for people how they feel about it, what questions they have, what else they would need to be successful, and then holding to purpose that I'm going to allow as we engage the way the state acronym to allow people to engage in that dialogue. And that for me is facilitating as a generous host, because I'm making sure that as we come together, we're not going to allow conversation that might feel extra contentious or that might be disrespectful or engaging in a way that isn't productive. So again, going back to what your purpose is, think about what kind of facilitator you need to be. And is open dialogue an example, or is a more structured dialogue in this way? All right, so one thing so those are the three big pieces. Is one, establish your purpose. Two, think about how you create the container. And then three, facilitate as a generous host. And those things will help us intentionally gather as leadership as an activity. And the way I also like to think about this is through the metaphor of a circus tent, right? Like, we know there's something magical about when you go into a circus or the tent experience. More so, I don't think I've actually ever experienced this, but the books I read or the movies I see, right? There's like this magic. And so every participant that comes to your gathering is going to leave changed as a result of that experience, right? You walk in one way, you leave another way, whether you're thinking or feeling or acting differently. And so what do you want that to be like? And as leadership is an activity focused on relationships, you get to create the tent. You get to create the experience that certainly has its logistics, but more so in the moment facilitates this process of growing and of learning. And I think that that's really energizing and exciting because it's different every single time. So here are, let's skip that part just for time. I'm cognizant we're getting close to noon, but here are some of the books and the resources that have been really influential in terms of how I think about gathering. And, I think that there's a lot of learning that we can do for what types of ways we can bring people together, especially as our world and the situations around us continue to change. So I will also include links to these in the follow-up email along with the PowerPoint that we can see. But if you ever want to learn more or talk more about these, I would be really excited to do that with you, because I feel like I'm still learning with every gathering that I engage in. And I'm excited that you all are seeing the connection between leadership and the ways in which we bring people together. So with that, any questions or closing thoughts as you think about your purposes and what you are wanting to gather and dialogue about in the future moving forward? All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and I'm excited to again connect with you. If there's a chance that you want to follow up on any particular gathering, know that I would be eager and thrilled to be able to do that with you. So have a great rest of your Tuesday, and maybe we'll see you at another Spirit of Leadership event throughout the week. Thank you.